How do you guys organize?
So,
First while, how to do it?
you know, I mean, 4 years ago, I was family.
Right.
Now there's cameras. We got about 2 or 3 years. So, I guess the core team now, myself, Kevin, we're signing millions, who's eventually going to be.
Okay. That's the idea.
That would be great. So, John Paul.
It seems really good.
But we're not going to send for something. Once a year, so it's like that. And then Zach Core. And here.
Not bad.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us on this Wednesday morning. I'm Jeff Ramsey. I'm the director for Venezuela at WOLA. I coordinate our Venezuela program alongside Kristen Martinez, David Smiley, and John Walsh. At WOLA, we advocate for a peaceful, democratic solution to the crisis. And I'm really glad to have you all here. Venezuela is in the midst of a deep political and economic crisis, as you all know. It's fueled a humanitarian emergency that's caused nearly 5 million people to abandon their homes and flee abroad. Although the international community has coalesced around the need for a peaceful democratic solution leading to free and fair elections, the crisis increasingly resembles a stalemate. Internationally, discussions on Venezuela increasingly involve geopolitical calculations. Many analysts describe Venezuela's crisis as another chapter in a struggle between great powers, between the United States, China, or Russia. Here in Washington, as we approach a hotly contested election cycle, there's a risk that the closer we are to November, the more U.S. policy towards Venezuela will have to do with political dynamics at home, and particularly in the state of Florida, and the less they'll have to do with the reality on the ground in Venezuela. So with all of this happening, WOLA is trying to ground the conversation. We're concerned that what should be a conversation on the political, economic, and social rights of Venezuelans is increasingly being overshadowed. And that's why we're so happy to welcome Ángel Zambrano, a peace activist with Laboratorio Ciudadano. Laboratorio Ciudadano is a group of committed advocates that are carrying out vital work across class lines to call for a peaceful, democratic solution to Venezuela's crisis. At a time when the loudest, most extreme voices are calling for counterproductive proposals like military intervention, Laboratorio Ciudadano is committed to creative, nonviolent advocacy that cuts through the polarization on the ground. Thanks again for being here. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Good morning. Placer. Nice to meet you. My name is Ángel. As Jeff said, it's great to be here with you. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Jeff and Kristen and the WOLA team that made this possible. This is my first time speaking about what we do in English, so I'm going to read in order not to lose myself in what I'm trying to say. We are an activist collective, as Jeff said, so I am here on behalf not of myself, but on behalf of a team. We are a team of 10 activists, so I am speaking on behalf of me, Angel, but also on behalf of Seymar, Isabela, Gracia, Maria Fernanda, Maria Luisa, Eduardo, Marcos, Pablo, and other allies and activists, Robbie as well. In the invitation for this event, I'm not sure if you had a chance to read it. It was near to what Jeff just said, but it read that Laboratorio Ciudadano, that we've been playing a leading role in the efforts to refocus the conversation beyond the competing geopolitical interests in a way that emphasizes our political, social, and economic. We must say that we consider ourselves small still, and that we don't consider ourselves leaders of a process, but more connectors of people and enablers of spaces and experiments that seek to refocus the conversation. So we wouldn't say we're leaders, but thank you so much for that perception. We seek, above all, to put people in first order and to converge, in order to converge in the gap that exists between the different poles that we know that exist. The polarization in Venezuela is deep, and it traverses us as a society, and we seek to put people first and talk about people and what we, the people that live in Venezuela, and what the almost 5 million people that have been forced to leave Venezuela, what are our pains and what we are going through as people, not as an anonymous political mess. This is why we do what we do. We believe we are not only in one of the deepest social, economical, and political crises that Venezuela or any country in the region has faced. We also believe we are facing a historic opportunity to rethink and reframe our ways of doing politics. We think this is essential, that this crisis gives us the opportunity to rethink and reframe our way of doing politics. And it's very exciting. It's very weird to live in a country that is so full of pain and so full of dramatic situations that you see every day, but at the same time there's like a vertigo to be living, an opportunity to transform the way that we associate and to transform the way that we do politics. Not only the people that do politics that belong to political parties, but we as a society in general, as civil society. We believe it is an opportunity to take on our citizenship, abordar nuestra ciudadanía, starting from the dignity of each person, and also to reshape our democracies. We believe that if we start the conversation at the dignity of each person, it will be a very different conversation than starting it if you are Chavista, opositor, left, right. If we put the dignity of each person in, let's say, as a priority for our politics, the conversation will be radically different. And we believe that our democracy in Venezuela was not the perfect democracy some people want to talk about. You know, when they say that Chavismo 20 years ago, Venezuela was a perfect democracy, a flawless democracy. We don't believe that. Venezuela, since many, many decades ago, has had very important flaws that have been traversing us as a society as well. And we think this today is an opportunity to rethink and reimagine our democracy, and our democracies in plural. is also an opportunity. We are living today, 2020, to put what we have learned and what we are learning into practice. We are learning a great deal from what we are living, not only us that are still in the country, but the more than 5 million people that have left, that have been forced to leave. We are learning as a society, and we believe this is an opportunity to put these learnings into practice and to imagine another possible future for us. We also believe that the political transition is not enough. When the political transition happens, however it happens, we hope that it happens democratically through elections. But whenever this political transition happens, it won't be enough. The social transition is also necessary. And this social transition, we think it is to seek from within our diversity as a society, to seek for common ground in order to recognize ourselves, to reunite and to restore our social fabric. In order to achieve this, we believe it is essential to do politics starting from dignity, what we said before, from our human rights and not from ideologies. I think this is essential, and we constantly talk about this. Do politics from human rights and with a human rights perspective, and not from the polarizing ideologies that have dominated the political scenario in Venezuela for the last 20-something years. If we do not achieve this other transition, this social transition, we believe that our democracy will remain weak and vulnerable in the face of this and any other authoritarismo, that word, I can't pronounce it well. Authoritarianism. This and any other that may come in the future. We are not ingenuos, naive. We are not naive, and we know that other autoritarismos may come in the future. And if we do not restore our social fabric, if we do not come together, we know we will still be vulnerable in the face of these models that seek to control, that seek social control, like the one that is currently in power in Venezuela. So, before speaking in depth about other things, I want to briefly tell you about Laboratorio Ciudadano, our organization, our collective of activists. We were born in 2017 during the protest cycle that you may remember. We were born out of a workshop that was organized in a library. It was a workshop on nonviolent protest. We didn't believe at the time that we were going to become an organization. We are today registered as a asociación civil sin fines de lucro. But at the time, it was just a workshop that people came together, people that were worried about the growing violence in the protests of 2017. Not only the violence created by the repression of the state, but also the violence that was everywhere, in social networks, in conversations, in messages that were painted on pancartas, signs. So we were born there it was very beautiful how the collective energy that came together when we spoke about nonviolence and when we told people that we wanted to think about nonviolence. None of us were experts, none of us had studied nonviolence. We were just citizens that wanted to raise our voices in a nonviolent way, and we started watching videos on YouTube, TED Talks, and started downloading PDFs, and that was the beginning of what we are today. And today we can say that we seek to do three things, to generate three things: action, fabric, and content around three other things, which are nonviolent resistance, human rights, and political innovation. Action, we protest nonviolently, raising our voices and joining those who raise theirs autonomously. For example, we accompanied 2 weeks ago the protest of a committee of family of victims that had been lost at seas. The people emigrating to Trinidad and Tobago and Aruba there are at least 60 people who have gone missing in these attempts to flee. They haven't gone missing because the ship crashes, the small ship crashes. They have gone missing because there is a sistema de trata de personas, with human trafficking, and for example, and they formed a committee. The family of these victims formed a committee, and they went to the public ministry to protest. We were there with them. So we protest, and not only on behalf of what we want to say, but on behalf of what others want to say. When we talk about fabric, we talk about the bonds we want to create, the bonds we think are imperative to create in order to do politics, putting people first. And we seek to enable plural and diverse gathering spaces and moments. We will talk about that more. I want to talk in depth more about that, but one of our main goals is to generate spaces where we can all speak and where we can all recognize each other. Chavistas, no chavistas, people who don't consider themselves either chavista or anti-chavista. And content, we also seek to generate campaigns that inform, reflect, ask questions, and share lessons that encourage collective action. Not only in the face of the oppression that we are facing today, but also in the face of the political innovations we consider necessary for our future. Our how we do this, we're a social laboratory. We experiment. We try to innovate. It's difficult at times. It's el ambiente, the ambient, the environment. Thank you. The environment is difficult. It's uphill, but we always try to find new ways of expressing ourselves, new ways of participating, and new ways of congregating people. These experiments are experiments of protest, of gathering, of community involvement, and of communication. And one of our searches has been for these experiments to arise from sensibility, joy, and in some cases beauty. In the face of oppression, we believe it essential to maintain joy, not in the way of indolence, but in the way of resistance. Joy, beauty, and sensibility. And we seek for our experiments to go in that line. Because we know that these are dimensions which oppression finds difficult to operate in, despite all its attempts. That we have been reading Hannah Arendt and Václav Havel, and these have been very important lessons that we have taken from other countries that have suffered from oppression. The fact that joy and beauty will survives any attempt of oppression, for us has been an invaluable lesson. The prototypes that have resonated the most have become the devices that we are still putting into practice. Some of them, just to mention some of them to you, well, La Perolera is shall we say, a percussion group that we protest with. We take recycled bottles of water and recycled containers of paint, the big ones, and we use them as drums to go to the protests, because we believe in protesting with joy, not with anger, or channeling the anger through joy. Another experiment is las birras despolarizadas. Depolarized beers would be the translation. We get together and drink beers and depolarize ourselves. And that has been very beautiful because we suffer polarization. Polarization, like runs through our blood at this stage of our lives and at this stage of what we are living through, what we are living as a society. So to get together people from different paths and different convictions and different political backgrounds, sit in a circle, drink beers, and talk about hard subjects, talk about polarizing subjects, is an experience that has been very, very rich and that we want to continue. We do workshops, we do nonviolence workshops with communities and with other organizations, and that has also been a very interesting device that we have put into action. These workshops are directed towards action. They're not that theoretical, they're more action oriented. And we also do juntaderas, what we call juntaderas. They're gatherings with music, with art, with any form of creativity or sensibility. And we just get together to see ourselves, to watch ourselves in the eyes and to say what we're up to and to say, hey, we're together. And that has been a space where it has been very important for us to be able to care for ourselves, because one of the things that we forget about when we are facing situations like the one we are facing in Venezuela is that the necessity to have a life and to have people care about you and you caring about people. And devices of community participation. We have been in some popular communities, what we call barrios, like El Calvario and La Palomera, looking for ways to channel community participation. What has happened, I think it's a phenomenon that is going on in all Latin America, is that the community participation sometimes is oriented exclusively towards political goals, meaning electoral goals or political party organization. And we believe in other ways of organizing community and channeling a community's inquietudes, concerns. And so we have been doing this. This is what we do in our day-to-day in Caracas. We're based in Caracas. That's important. And a very important thing is to let you know that Caracas is a bubble. The life of people in other cities is much, much, much more difficult than what our life is in Caracas. Talking about electricity, water, our basic social services, public services, in Caracas we are better off. But we are there and we do this work every day, not alone, but with a whole ecosystem of friends and organizations that we work with. I think it's important to say that these tools, these devices have a limited impact. We're small. we believe that we don't have incidents like very big political and social incidents. And it's frustrating at times because the dimension of injustice and suffering of Venezuela, of our people, makes us long for powerful nonviolent movement, like the ones that we see in documentaries about Poland and South Africa and India and the civil rights movement in the United States and Serbia. And we want that, and when we see the documentaries on YouTube, we say, this is what we need. But it doesn't work like that. It's one day at a time. It's a construction that will take time, that will take many years, that is slow, and it has its own rhythms, and it's based on trust. And trust is not decreed, but built. So yeah, it's one day at a time, and our impact is limited, but we're there. We're going there, we think. We aim for our incidence and impact to escalate through experimentation, prototyping, and reflection, and conversations. And that's why we keep consolidating our processes and our capacities, seeking to be sustainable in order to resonate in various and diverse spaces. This is very important for us, as the sustainability of us as an organization and the movement, the nonviolent movement we are part of. It's hard to be sustainable in a country where things happen every day. People leave, people suffer a great deal, people are looking for ways to survive, and sustainability is a big issue, not only for us, but for other organizations working there. How are we doing on time? Okay, great. Okay, so let's speed it up. Sorry. I had read this in my mind in my room at my house, and this was way faster. I'm sorry. We are focusing on sharing our learnings. We think it is very important for the building of the movement to share our learnings. And here I have a list of 13 learnings that we took from 2019. I'm going to very, very quickly go through some of them. The only way out is a day-to-day struggle with no savior nor messiah. We're very personalistic, I think, like the rest of Latin America and other countries as well. Second, the actions that can lead us to a democratic transition can be simultaneous, they are not exclusive. Street, negotiation, elections, international community, they can all be working at the same time. Besides the democratic transition, the social transition is necessary. Mistrust breaks us. We need to lose our fear of encounter. That is a very important one. Human rights first. It is necessary to take human rights to the street, that each person knows them, understands them, exercises them, and demands them. The oppressor knows about violence and wins in the field of confrontation. Violent actions, disqualification, and personal attacks only favor the oppressor. Against violence, we are joy. Pleasure and celebration can be spaces for bonding with each other, restoring each other, and resisting those who want us fragmented, depressed, and resigned. The first sovereignty is that of the body. That is the first territory, and from that sensibility, and not only from rationality, we do politics and exercise collective actions. Another learning, I think this is very important, that there is always a pulse for life. Communities and cities and families and organizations do not die. Their strongholds of energy only mutate and change and live in other spaces. Enough of putting the security and welfare of states and their political structures at the center. We need to build systems that always put people first. And the total crisis we are experiencing is a horror that cannot be repeated, but it is also an opportunity. It opens the field to put into practice what we are learning and to imagine other possible futures for us in Venezuela. And if I have 2 more minutes, I want to briefly talk to you about 2 sides of reality that we are seeing. The A side and the B side, like an old record. Because we have an A side, we have a political reality that is probably known by you. I'm going to only mention some of the points we consider most important. There is growing repression, militarization, and spread of fear as a demobilization strategy. There are extrajudicial executions carried out by FAES every day, mainly in poor communities, barrios. Paramilitary collectives acting unpunished, constant presence of police and military forces in all forms of public space. Airports, squares, streets, military and police are everywhere. There is growing fragmentation of the state. Power is escaping from state institutions and concentrating in the hands of irregular armed groups like guerrillas, criminal unions, paramilitaries, and violent collectives. There is growing inequality and social exclusion, and it is growing at a very, very, very rapid pace. There is a de facto dollarization of our economy. everything you can buy in dollars, everything, like a hot dog on the street, tomatoes at the supermarket, and everything that's in between. The dollar is a new official coin, especially in Maracaibo. And this de facto dollarization of our economy has deepened the gap that divides people who have access to dollars. Some say it's 10%, others say it's 15% of the country, and the rest of the people who survive with salaries in bolívares, about 85–90% of the people. So poverty, extreme poverty, is rising very rapidly. And there is growing social control as well. The oppression uses the growing dependence of food, boxes, and bags, claps, the boxes and bags of food that the state gives out, and the cash coupons that are handed out through the Carnet de la Patria. The Patria is fatherland, the fatherland card. Something, well, exactly. As a method of social and political control and coercion. This is true, and this is more extended every day. And popular protest and organized civil society do not have real incidence or impact. We have to be very true to ourselves about this. We can't lie to ourselves and say that we, civil society, can have an impact today in Venezuela and what goes on. We believe in Laboratorio Ciudadano that we do not have the impact or the incidence we wish we had, and we need to be realistic about this. Because the oppression has been very innovative. They innovate every day in its ways of repression and demobilization, and they know how to fragment our social fabric and disassemble the various and diverse demonstrations of discontent. We see two possible scenarios. A negotiated transition that takes place between political elites, and we sincerely hope it is in the form of elections, if it happens. We believe that that would be the only way for this change to be sustainable. And the other scenario is that there's no political change in the short term, and that we continue to go into a sort of Polish resistance scenario, like the one that Poland lived, which is a silent construction of the resistance movement that adapts and survives. And talking about the B-side very, very quickly, sorry Jeff, I'm sorry. In the spirit of refocusing the conversation, which we believe is very important to take the conversation away from what Jeff mentioned at the beginning, these geopolitical interests, this Trump, Putin. In the spirit of refocusing and putting other things on the table, we want to tell you about what we call the B-side of our reality, beyond the domination and suffocation generated by the notorious facts of the A-side, those hideous things that we go through every day, and especially people that are struggling for their lives as we speak. Beyond that domination and suffocation, other things are happening, and below and at the margins of the sense of stagnation and hopelessness that is generated by design, the oppression model by design, it suffocates us, and it injects hopelessness in us. Beyond that sense of hopelessness, there is movement. There are things happening. Everywhere you look, there's movement, and there's something vibrating and something pulsing, like latente. I'm not sure how to say that, but it's, you see it, you feel it. And everywhere you look, when you go out to the street today, on any given Wednesday, Thursday, Monday, you see people in the street that are living and moving. And it's not resignation that's carrying them, it's resistance. And that's very beautiful. To be in a situation where 5 million people have left, that is around 15% of the country, has left fleeing and has been forced to leave, to live in a situation like that and still see people resisting and smiling and joking and moving and making plans and celebrating birthdays and having weddings is very beautiful. And every day it inspires us to carry on. That's a very important part of the B-side for us. And you see it every day. You don't have to work at an NGO or have contact with special people. You see it in every corner of Caracas or Maracaibo or Puerto Ordaz, Puerto La Cruz, or whichever city you go to. Yeah, and another thing that is fundamental for us is, and we invest time and energy and hope, is in this other transition we were talking about, the social transition. Very slowly, we have been seeing it very clearly from about 2 years ago. People are getting together. People that come from opposite positions, Chavistas, people that have been Chavista for 20 years, that are still Chavista, and people that have never been Chavistas. They're coming together and they are talking and they're looking themselves in the eyes and they are sitting at the same table. We are sitting at the same table. And that was unthinkable 2 years ago, 1 year ago, 6 months ago. Totally unthinkable. It was unimaginable. And that is happening more and more every day. And one very important thing is that to sit together, we are not giving up our various political identities or our positions. We are not crossing bridges just to convince each other of what we know is true. We are seeing each other, listening to each other, recognizing each other, and asking ourselves what our pains, nuestros dolores, what our pains have been during the last 20, 30, and 40 years. We are showing our scars, and we believe that is a very important process. And it is slow, and it occurs when there's trust, and we're going there. And in the middle of so much pain, what I said before, and so much dehumanization, we are still alive and living. In the streets, we see gestures of solidarity and humor. We continue to meet with friends and family. We celebrate birthdays. We dance. We laugh. We enjoy everything we still can out of life. And this is not indolence. I think it's very important to highlight that this is not indolence. It is not adaptation. And it is not fingir demencia. We have that expression in Venezuela. It's like to act as if you were crazy and you do not see what you have in front of you. It is not that. And just to close, I promise this is the last thing I will say before we begin the conversation. 3 weeks ago it was Carnavales, a very big celebration that people go to the beach, people dress up, people party, people have caravanas, and it's like a big party. And we asked ourselves these questions. Is it possible to conjugate the urgency to breathe, to celebrate, with the act of commemorating all those who we have lost at the hands of a regime that unabashedly practices abandonment? Can we celebrate and sing those losses, not only in our sadness, but also in our joy? Would we dare dress up as those who are no longer here with us, to name them out loud? And we responded tentatively that this tension is urgent, and that this tension is not in conflict with conscience. That this is how resistance goes. That this is how resistance goes. This tension and conscience and joy and love and getting together, and one day at a time. And that's all for now. Thank you. Sorry.
Thanks so much, Open. And before we open it up, I just wanted to ask you just a couple of comments here. You mentioned the importance of depolarization efforts. Here in Washington, we hear a lot that no, the era of polarization in Venezuela is over. I mean, you look at the polls. Maduro has between 15-20% support. I mean, this is not a polarized society. We can't treat this as two warring bands. What do you say to those people?
Yes, that's totally true. It's it's not a simple polarization as it was before. It's not half of the country is Chavista, half of the country is anti-Chavista. It's polarization in the sense of a deep fragmentation in our society. Because it's true, 15% of the country supports Maduro, but we are deeply fragmented in every aspect of life. Not only if we vote for Maduro or we vote for whoever opposes him. That would be too simple a concept to describe what's happening here. Because in Venezuela, people who don't vote for Maduro, who consider themselves Chavista, have been put apart of people who are anti-Chavista or anti-Maduro. We have been fragmented by design and as a strategy to debilitate our social fabric. So it is not polarization in the sense of two competing bands, but is in the sense of that we are a fragmented society, and that fragmentation is probably what the biggest obstacle that we see in the way of a real democracy and a society that can build a democracy.
And then just finally, because we're here in Washington, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, the conversation on Venezuela policy revolves mostly around the U.S. role in addressing the crisis and getting to some kind of solution. We've seen talk of all options being on the table, talk of options under the table. The conversation here in Washington often revolves around the issue of sanctions, individual sanctions versus financial, oil sanctions that have a broader impact. How do you see that conversation? What do you think? What do you think the role of those of us that are watching the crisis unfold in Venezuela here from the United States is in playing a productive role?
Okay. Well, we believe in first place that it has hurt our movement very deeply. The Cold War, the Trump and Putin, and the talk of all options being on the table, under the table, has been very, very perjudicial, damaging for the construction of our social movement. Very damaging. And the big role that the United States is playing in the form of Donald Trump has been very damaging for our movement. We have a consigna, a chant that we sing on the streets that we created in Laboratorio. It says, "No somos Putin, no somos Trump, somos el pueblo unido contra el opresor." We are not Putin, we are not Trump, we are the people united against the oppressor. And I think that resumes our position. We are not what we are living in Venezuela is not part of a geopolitical conversation. It is the lives of people, and we think that has to be at the center of the conversation. And we would wish that here, as you mentioned in the upcoming elections, that would be the theme. We are not naive, and we know that we are a geopolitical token that will be used in the elections here and in other countries, without doubt. But we consider it essential to have these conversations and to escape from that geopolitical, macro-political conversation and to ground it into the needs of the people and the suffering of the people in Venezuela. And that's why we are very grateful with WOLA and with all the organizations that are working for the conversation to change and to revolve around this and not that.
Well, thanks. Why don't we open it up to any questions, any comments? Sure, go ahead.
Keith Mines from the U.S. Institute of Peace. I think you probably worked with Maria Stefan and some of our people.
Yeah.
Tabata.
And Tabata as well.
Right, good. The question I had was, what are the limits of your engagement with Chavistas? Like, how far can you go? Can you get to the colectivos, the hardcore, or what are the? Because I know the dissident Chavistas are easy to get to, but how far can you go in that direction? And then, if you could talk a little bit about the general threat to NGOs in the country right now, political, legal, security. And then finally, you talked about the protests, that it's just not going to be Tahrir Square kind of a movement. Could you talk a little bit about why not, though? What is it that limits people from marching on the palace?
Thank you. How far can we go with Chavistas? As far as trust enables to, and as far as we can build those bridges of trust. And with colectivos, for example, at this moment it would be very difficult to, I would say impossible. 1 month ago we were protesting with the teachers. They were protesting for a salario digno, how do you say? A dignified salary. The teachers, maestras y maestros, and some colectivos came and threw literally excrements on us. So some of the more violent colectivos, we believe, are at a level of dehumanization that would be very, very difficult to talk and walk with them. But we believe these are the more noisy, like in social networks, like the radicals are the noisiest. We believe that from the Chavista process, there are many, many people, many organizations, and many communities that are open to dialogue and conversation, and we are there with them. We have been talking with many, many people that come from the Chavista process, and many people that are still identify themselves as Chavista. And we believe that in the base of society, there are many people who we can talk with. And that would be like an example of this depolarization and defragmentation that would be able to expand and resound in other places of society. So how far can we go? I believe we can go very far, because it's so much that we have to do. We don't need to start with the radicals. We don't need to start with the violent collectives or Diosdado Cabello. We need to start with who we have in front, and there's a long path to walk there. Threats to NGOs. 1 week ago, 2 weeks ago, Diosdado Cabello again mentioned Provea, and again threaded Provea and Rocío San Miguel, putting those cases as an example. And he, as a representative of the government, spoke very clearly about what their intentions with NGOs are. They threat us, and they will close us if they see the need to. And besides that, like, political threat that is constant and very intimidating, there is also the fact that in public offices, like, you cannot register a new NGO, and you cannot update the NGO's status. So if you need to, we have the civil association, and we need to update our board of directors, for example. We cannot do that. It's prohibited, and there have been cases that funcionarios that have let an NGO update its status, they have been imprisoned or fired. So it is very difficult nowadays to be an NGO. There is always a latent threat there, a political threat that anything you do will be repressed by the government. And there is also logistics-wise, that you can't have access to financing, that you can't have your papers up to date, you can't register a new NGO. It's simply impossible. So I think the government, the oppression has it's very clear to the oppression that the NGOs and civil society is dangerous to them, so they put every obstacle possible. And can you repeat the third question? I have it.
Why don't we get to a Tahrir Square moment where people just protest without stopping until it ends?
I think a lot has to do with that 80% of the country is surviving, and that the oppression has been very innovative to control the discontent. For example, if you protest because there is no water in your community and they see you protesting, they will not give you a clap. They will cut you out from the clap, the food that the government hands out. And 75% of the country receives clap. And more than 50% of the country depends on clap to eat. So I think that is the main reason that there is not a great protest movement, because everywhere you go and what you hear, everyone knows that the government is responsible for this. Everyone knows that in 2017 was the year that the sanctions that are not personal began. People know that the sanctions are not responsible for the food shortages and for the electricity shortages and for the water shortages. That is a known fact, and it's very, very rare to find voices that are with the government in the metro or in the bus stops or in the street. And the descontento the discontent is absolutely generalized. But the repression and the fear, they have been so effective in sembrar, in sowing fear in society, that there is no uprising in the horizon. At least I don't believe so. Thank you.
Why don't we go a couple of questions at a time? We'll start with Joy in the back, and then
Hi, thank you for the presentation and for being here, and for your work. I was wondering, so you're a group of a nucleus of 10, right? And I think these movements do build, but if you look back at the civil rights movement and other different kinds of organizing, often, chapters come into being, and as you're doing violence trainings and things like that, do you see that developing? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Justin Over from the School for Conflict Analysis and Resolution at George Mason University. Considering part of the power of a bottom-up approach to nonviolent action is the ability to tap into social networks, including the ability to tap into the social networks that sustain the military, the Venezuelan military. Does the potential fragmentation of the military generate a risk for further violence?
Tabitha Thompson, also with USA.
Good.
Nice to meet you in person. My question is actually related to what you were talking about earlier with response to repression and the clap. This has obviously come up in different conversations we've had. What ways are you and others thinking about kind of responding to that type of repression, forming alternative institutions or things like that, partnering with aid organizations to be able to counter that kind of psychological and very real repression by the government against normal Venezuelans?
Okay. Thank you for your questions and comments. Yes, it's your question about that movement developing and chapters being formed. It's hard. It's very hard. People are surviving is the thing. I think that's the main obstacle we have. People are too busy surviving. But at the same time, people are not resigning themselves. We are not resigning ourselves. And we have had experiences in communities where there's a lot of interest to learn about nonviolence and about how we can organize ourselves autonomously in order to resist. And we're doing it, but it's still very small. And other people are doing it in other states, in other cities of the country. It's still very, very small. And we are atomizados, spread out, and we're connecting, and I believe we're walking towards there, but I believe it will still take time and organization, because one thing is that going like way back, our social fabric has never been too strong. I think it has to do with oil, with the almighty state that has always been in place in Venezuela since the 40s and 50s. It has to do with political cooptation of civil society. So we don't have a strong social fabric, not only from when Chavez won. Before we didn't have that either. So we weren't prepared for this socially. We didn't have the ties and the fabric to resist this and to have like un terreno fértil, fertile ground for these chapters to occur. But I believe we're walking there, and we're much better off. We're much better today than we were 4 years ago, for example. And it's one day at a time, and it's kind of frustrating, and it's very hard to, because we imagine those chapters like the civil rights movement here, and it has so much sense, and we say that it is possible because there's the people, and there's the need, and there's the people that have learned about nonviolence, but when we go to reality, it's very, very slow. It's a very slow process. But I think that slow cooking will ultimately be better, because it's not like, well, last year you saw probably at this time last year there was a lot of efervescencia, and there was so many people on the streets, and everyone was like, this is it, it's going to be now. And that wasn't sustainable. And I think the small steps we are taking towards that, I think those steps are at least being sustained. Bottom-up approach, social networks, military. Okay. One thing with the military is that the military has already been fragmented by the government, by the oppression. They fragmented it and they divided it in a way, and they deinstitutionalized the military in a way that it is very difficult to fragment that social network. Because it's almost not a social network anymore. It has the scheme of mafias, is that towards where your question was made?
Yeah. I guess what sort of risks for further violence exist if there's fragmentation, but if they're impeding the ability to fragment them?
Yeah, and we saw it, in the April 30th of last year, almost 1 year ago, when there was this attempt for a military insurrection, that it did not succeed. We believe it's because the military have already been fragmented, and the risk of violence comes from what we talked about earlier, that the state is fragmented, and violence is not, there's no monopoly of violence anymore. Now violence is in the hands of the military, but also the police, and also in the narcotráfico and the guerrillas. There's proof that they are in Venezuelan territory, and in the mafias and in the colectivos. So, and those social networks, they aren't social networks. They're just like mob schemes. Like in el arco minero del Orinoco, in the south of the country, the mining, that model of mob economies has been like dispersed all over the country. So that's kind of the answer to that. And Tabata, Alternative institutions, yes. We believe that solidarity is one of the values that nos cohesiona, gives us social cohesion, but also it competes with el rentismo, no? El rentismo, depending on the state, the state handing out, and you depending on the state for everything. So it is difficult to imagine alternative institutions in this situation, but we see examples of it in everyday life. Small, very small examples. Probably many of them won't transcend into history because they are very small, very day-to-day, people organizing themselves as a community to buy food together and make it cheaper to buy food, and people organizing un comedor, an eating place for the kids of the community. So we believe that the same, I think it goes more or less with the first question I answered in this round. It's very small, step-by-step birth of autonomy, because we haven't had autonomy, really, as a civil society. We haven't. We have had a super powerful state that hands out. And I believe the construction of that autonomy has begun in many places, and I just don't see it having the necessary scale, definitely. And I think for us to scale it to the necessary level, it will be many years of work, of autonomous work. And the more frustrating but the more interesting thing is that it can't be centralized. It can't be a plan carried out by some people with some funds. It has to be bottom-up, organic, and it's there. It's there. There are many examples, small, very small examples, and we believe one of the things we can do is to make them visible and just make the path they are pointing to visible. Because they are pointing to a path, people are organizing, and people, chavistas, no chavistas, people neutral, they're coming together to attend their social needs, and that is a path that is there. And yeah, it will take years, but it's there.
I wanted to ask you, the last 2 weeks we've seen some interesting developments towards some kind of agreement on a new national electoral council. We saw the committee that's charged with naming a new electoral council in the National Assembly. It's made up of Chavista lawmakers, lawmakers that recognize Guaido as president of the National Assembly, some lawmakers that recognize Parra as president of the National Assembly. In the last few days, we've seen this committee name 10 representatives of civil society, most of which have some party affiliation, but one of them doesn't.
10%.
Yeah. But we have this step towards an accord on a new CNE. Those of us that are really hoping for some kind of peaceful, negotiated electoral solution to the crisis saw this as a tiny sign of hope. How optimistic should we be about this? What are the realistic challenges that this could face? And just more broadly, I mean, what do you see as the way forward for any kind of political solution in Venezuela?
Okay, thank you for that question. How optimistic should we be? We should be moderate and manage our hope. Yes, we have one of the learnings from these years is to try for our expectations to be moderated, because we're like, we have had peaks, emotional peaks, many emotional peaks that later leave us like more buried than we were before. With this, I think there is moderation in the expectations about the new electoral council, the new CNE, because it is visibly very precarious. This sort of agreement that we are seeing and that we didn't expect at all, it's very precarious, and it has to be that there are some deep conversations going on and negotiations going on between government and opposition, which we celebrate. We wish it would be more transparent. We wish it could happen in the form of Oslo and Barbados, because we believe it to be very important for them to talk and for us as a civil society to know what they're talking about. And we believe that we, as organized civil society, we do have to raise our voices and say that, yes, that is the way. The elections are the way we believe that are the exit route to the situation we're living. And next week, there will be a meeting of different organizations and people. And the interesting thing is that we are uniting ourselves around this subject, the elections, the possible elections, and that in this meeting there will be people from the whole spectrum, the whole political spectrum. This is one of the subjects that unites us, that depolarizes us or defragments us, and we're working on having a voice. We don't have that voice yet. Civil society doesn't have a voice saying this is the way, and so political parties need to follow this direction. We don't have it still. We're working on it, and definitely the elections are a subject that around which there is an agreement to raise our voices and say, this is the way. That being said, it's precarious, and we are moderating our expectations, but we are ready to, if it falls apart, we are ready to go out in our small scale and say, this, we have to continue looking for this way.
Well, any more questions from the audience? Any comments? Well, I think that will bring us to a close. I do want to say, I think the work that Laboratorio is doing is incredibly important on the ground. I think, if we're going to see some kind of political solution to the crisis in Venezuela, I think groups like yours that understand the need to organize across political class lines are going to be fundamental in any kind of solution. I would say, though, that the birras despolarizadas was a serious missed opportunity. I think we could have gone with polares despolarizadas. No? All right. Anyway, thanks so much.
And we could have done that here.
Yeah.
A bit later.
Yeah.
In the day.
We could have done this at 7 o'clock.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for coming. I encourage you all to speak with him after, and thanks a lot. We appreciate it.
Thank you. And I forgot, I brought some stickers that we make at Lao. I have them over there at Jeff's office. I'll be back in 2 minutes with the stickers. Thank you for being here, and my email, my phone number, I can give it out. It's zambranoangel@gmail.com. You can write it down. I'm there in Caracas, whatever you need from there. If you need contact with other organizations, there's a lot of people doing a lot of amazing stuff over there. If you need to be in touch with them, or if you have more questions or anything, I'm there. Thank you for being here.